All right, I'm going to do the 10 games in 10 minutes video later today. That's the video I've done the last couple of weeks where I try to run through a 10 games, like a minute each per game, 10 games in 10 minutes. I'm going to do that later today, but I'm obsessed with this. The next 2 weeks of the season, getting back to the video I made yesterday where I talked about the 9 teams that still have a chance to make the playoffs, or the 9 teams that I think still have a chance to make the playoffs, and who they each play over the next 2 weeks and who might win out, who might lose a game. But I want to talk about 2 of those games in particular right now, and then I'll do the 10 games in 10 minutes video later today. But Louisville, who is 9-1 and has a chance still to play for and win the ACC and then potentially make the playoffs, and Oregon State, not Oregon State, Washington, Oregon State. Washington is playing Oregon State. So Louisville and Washington, of course, 10-0, playing at Oregon State this week. Louisville, 9-1, playing at Miami. So here we have 2 top 10 teams, both still in the playoff hunt, both still in the hunt to play for and win their conference, right? Yet both are underdogs this week, according to Vegas. If you look at the lines on these games, Louisville on the road at Miami. Louisville's about a 1-point underdog on the road at Miami. Washington is actually like a 2 or a 3-point underdog on the road at Oregon State. So at least according to the people out in the desert, they're expecting some losses this week by these 2 top 10 teams, these 2 playoff contending teams. Let's start with Louisville on the road at Miami. Miami has been a very up and down team this season, right? They have looked pretty good at times. They have looked totally inept at times. They've looked outmatched in terms of players at times. They've definitely looked outmatched in terms of coaching at times, if you go back to that Georgia Tech game. But they're still a fairly talented team. Now, they've got some quarterback issues. They've been kind of rotating them in and out. It hasn't gone well for Tyler Van Dyke. He got benched. They played Williams last week. He got hurt. Now it looks like Van Dyke is the guy again. And Louisville, on the other hand, they're definitely the most out of the blue team still in playoff contention at 9-1. There was a lot of talk this offseason about Louisville potentially making a run to the ACC title. And even that was a little far-fetched for most people. But I didn't hear anybody talking about Louisville making a potential run to the college football playoff. A first-year head coach there, Jeff Brom, comes down from Purdue, so kind of a homecoming for him at Louisville. And honestly, Louisville's a team I was dead wrong on. When I heard people talk about Louisville this offseason, outside of getting Brom in there, I really didn't understand the hype. And when you looked at their schedule, you said, well, the schedule sets up good because they avoid some of the upper echelon teams in the ACC. But even that ended up not being completely or totally true, with the collapse of Clemson and some other, the rise of Duke. Like some of the teams you thought were going to be good in the ACC weren't. Some of the teams you didn't think would be that good were. So it's just been a weird season, and I feel like Louisville is definitely the most least talked about 9-1 team or top 10 team or team that has potential conference title aspirations or playoff aspirations. The only thing really that comes close to Louisville in terms of people just never talking about them are Big Ten West teams. Somebody from the Big Ten West has to win the Big Ten West, and somebody has to show up to play the winner of the Big Ten East. But we all know they've got no shot at winning. That's not the case with Louisville. I think if Louisville makes the ACC title game, they've got a decent shot. The reality is in a one-game situation where everything's on the line, if you're in that game, I guess technically you have a shot. Now, I know I said the Big Ten West doesn't, and they don't really. But Louisville has looked pretty good at times, and Florida State, as good as they've been, and they are a good team, I don't think anybody's watched Florida State play this year and thought to themselves that, they look unbeatable or anything like that. So it's just been a wild ride for Louisville this year. But they're an underdog on the road at Miami. So what do y'all think? Is Louisville going to drop a game? We talked about this a lot yesterday, but there are all sorts of scenarios floating around out there, and I do the call-in shows, and I get calls, and, well, if these 6 teams win out, then how are you going to choose the top 4? The reality is that it just rarely happens that way. Usually some of these things start to work themselves out. Now, I will admit, if there was ever a year this late in the season where it looked like maybe those things won't work themselves out, it's this year. But I still think we're going to see a lot of these top 10 teams lose over the next couple of weeks and then into conference championship Sunday or Saturday. And by the time selection Sunday rolls around the following day after the conference title games, I think it's going to be pretty clear to most of us who the playoff teams are. And like most years, you may have a slight debate or argument over the 4 and the 5, right? And it could start this weekend with some losses. These aren't the only 2 top 10 teams that could lose this weekend. Obviously, if you're playing, it's a potential of losing. But it's odd to me to have 2 teams this late in the season, both ranked in the top 10, be underdogs against either lower ranked or, in Miami's case, an unranked team. I mean, Miami is unranked, and Louisville on the road is an underdog. Now, Washington's an underdog to Oregon State. Oregon State is ranked. They only have 2 losses. They've been a decent team this year, and at times have looked pretty good. They got, DJ Uiagalelei from Clemson. Clemson didn't need him, I guess. They have Cade Klubnik. Anyway, don't get me started on that. Cade Klubnik, turnover machine, and just not a good quarterback, honestly. Washington, to me, is another interesting story because in the first 3 or 4 weeks of the season, the thought crossed my mind more than one time that Washington might be the best team in the country. And I think they were playing that way through the first 3, 4, 5 weeks of the season. Then they had that huge matchup with Oregon. They won, and it looked like Washington was on the way to a for sure playoff spot at the end of the season. And they still have a really, really good chance of getting there. They're in the top 4 or 5 now, depending on which rankings you look at, whether you go by the playoff rankings or whatever else. And, if they went out, they're going to get in. Now, should they lose this game and then beat Oregon again, they probably still get in, but you don't want to be losing this late in the season. You're better off being in Alabama where you sort of lose early in the year and you have time to kind of prove yourself over the next couple of months, right? It's dangerous to lose a game this late in the year if you're a Washington. They got to go on the road and play Oregon State. It's a tough place to play. And again, Oregon State has been a good team this year, sitting there with just 2 losses. I think they're ranked in the top 15. I don't know, 12 or 13, 11, somewhere in there, something like that. So a good team and a dangerous spot for Washington. And I'm not the only one that thinks that because, again, Oregon State is actually favored at home in this game by 2.5. So that means even on a neutral field, Vegas feels like Washington is only a point or 2 better. You usually get about 3 to 4 points if you're the home team. Vegas will give you an extra 3 or 4 points. So with Oregon State being a 2.5 point favorite at home, that tells me they feel like these are 2 pretty even teams heading into this game, giving Oregon State the edge with being at home. I just have a hard time believing that in a game of this magnitude, Michael Penix is going to lose to DJ Uiagalelei. I know Washington hasn't been great. I talked about how they looked over the first month of the season, and I've had some concerns about them too, just like everybody else has over the last few weeks. The defense is not playing great. But Oregon State, as good as their record is, they don't have a great offense. And DJ Uiagalelei, he's having a good season. He's not having anywhere near a great season. I mean, if you look at his numbers, they're actually pretty similar to Cade Klubnik's numbers at Clemson. And how many people think Cade Klubnik's having a great season? Not very many. It's just hard for me to imagine that Penix, even on the road, is going to lose to DJ Uiagalelei. Now, of course, it could happen, and I think, this is a very dangerous game for Washington. I think I'm going to pick Washington to win here. I do feel like some of these teams are going to lose over the next couple of weeks and into conference championship Saturday, and I definitely think Washington is one of those teams that could do that. If I had to pick the game right now down the road between Oregon and Washington, I'd go with Oregon. I think they do have a quarterback that can keep up with and potentially outduel Michael Penix. I don't think Oregon State does. I'm going to go with Washington to get, I guess, an upset win on the road at Oregon State. And circling back around to the Louisville at Miami game, I think there's a better chance of Miami beating Louisville than there is of Oregon State beating Washington. I actually think Louisville wins too. which means I'm probably wrong on at least one of these. I should probably go with my gut. My gut tells me, just like I've said, that we're about to start seeing some of these top 10 teams lose. But yet here I am when it comes time to make the pick, and I can't pull the trigger. I'm very tempted to go with Miami at home. It's their quarterback situation that's really making me stick with Louisville, I think. I know Tyler Van Dyke was the original starter, and now he's back in, but there's a reason he wasn't starting, last week. He just hasn't played well. I don't know. These are going to be two really good games. I'm going to take Washington, though, and I'm going to take Louisville. I think Louisville remains with just the one loss, and I think Washington stays undefeated. But let me know what you think about these two games down below. We're going to see some upsets. Let me know. Have a good morning.